you're in a run for the president of the United States. Why? Certainly from a third-party perspective, the odds have got to be long. So why are you doing it?
I saw something happening to my country that I couldn't really imagine. I saw this huge division that's so toxic now, so poisonous. I don't think we've seen anything like this since the American Civil War. And it's all amplified by the social media algorithms that are pushing us farther and farther into our positions, into these kind of tribal positions. But the origin of it is I believe, the capture of our political parties by corporate interests and the corruption that's come from that.
Is that true on both sides, Democrat and Republican?
Yeah, and they're both owned by, interests that are not necessarily America's interests.
Do you believe that our educational system is on the brink of catastrophic collapse?
I think it's already collapsed. I think, the outcomes that you just inventoried is evidence of a utter collapse of the system. We can fix the system, but you need to do something disruptive. Which,
of course, takes money. And I want to talk about money. When your uncle was president, he seemed to have the idea that a lower tax rate brought about a higher tax revenue. What's your view on that?
I'm not going to raise the tax rates in this country. I may switch around some of the tax burdens to incentivize the best behavior, but I'm not going to raise taxes. We want to lower tax rates as much as possible. We have a $34 trillion debt, and we can't just print money. I saw President Trump on your show, and it was an amazing show, and I think you really bring out the best in people, and I know that's your objective, but he was talking about how strong the economy was during his administration, but he printed $8 trillion, which is more than all presidents combined from George Washington to George W. Bush in 283 years of history. So it's pretty easy to produce the illusion of wealth if you're stealing money from future generations, and printing money like that is just theft. That can't be our solution.
How much has the Biden administration printed?
$6.3 billion today, but they will beat President Trump. Yeah, that's right. What's wrong? And it's addiction to war. It's the chronic disease epidemic, the biggest cost. That's costing us $4.3 trillion. We have to end that. We have to, or we're dead. It's 4.3. It's 5 times our military budget. We've gone from 6% of GDP to healthcare to about 18%. And 6% when my uncle was president, 18% today, and it's growing exponentially. And we spend more on healthcare than any other country in the world, 2 or 3 times per capita what the Europeans, and we're 79th in health outcomes. We're behind Costa Rica, we're behind Mongolia, we're behind Cuba, we're behind Nicaragua.
How is that even possible? There are 50 countries in the world where a mother has a better chance of surviving childbirth than America. 51 countries in the world where the infant has a better chance of surviving than America. America!
Yeah.
How is that possible,
when
Robert?
When I were kids, we had the best healthcare system in the world, bar none. Today, we have the worst. We have extraordinary doctors in this country, that are doing things that are incredibly innovative. But we have the worst health outcomes. It's because of chronic disease. And we've got to figure out what's causing it, eliminate it. And it's not rocket science. It's glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. It's neonicotinoid pesticides. It's atrazine. It's PFOAs, the forever chemicals that are in all of our child's pajamas. They're in our furniture. I've litigated on them as well. It's high fructose corn syrup.
These other countries don't have that?
No, if you want to drink a Coke, drink a Mexican Coke, because they don't allow it down there. There's 1,000 ingredients in our food that are banned in Europe. And we're poisoning, we're mass poisoning an entire generation of kids. These kids are obese. It's not because they suddenly got lazy. It's not because we're mass poisoning them. And I, as president, I'm going to put an end to that. I'm going to say we're going to give drug development and and infectious disease a little break for 8 years. And we're going to find out why our kids, the sickest kids in the world, find out why they have diabetes, why they have asthma, why these exponentially here better, larger than any other country in the world.
How do you do that? Everybody wants to hold on. They don't want to get smaller. They want to get bigger. And it's government's going to fix everything. Let's get more government. Let's get bigger government. Let's fix everything.
You have powerful industries like high fructose corn syrup that has millions of farmers and who've been sucked into that industry. Those companies have on their payrolls the chair of all the agricultural committees in both houses, and they own the USDA. So the question is, even if you found out that high fructose corn syrup was the cause of, a large cause of the obesity epidemic and diabetes epidemic, could you do anything about it? That's the question. Can you use power? And I know I can do it, and I'll tell you how. And all the things that I promise when I'm running are things that I can do without the help of Congress, because I know how things work, and I know you can't count on Congress anymore. I'm going to go down to NIH, and I'm going to say to them, we're going to find out what's causing these, and we're going to do a lot of science on them. Once you have that science that makes that causal connection between an exposure and an injury, you pass a threshold in the federal court called the Daubert threshold, which allows attorneys to bring lawsuits. When we brought the Monsanto lawsuit, everybody said you can never get Roundup. They're too powerful. The first case we won $289 million on. The second case we won $89 million. The third case, we asked the jury for $1 billion, and they gave us $2.2 billion. And then Monsanto came to the negotiating table, and they agreed to remove glyphosate from home gardening products. You can't do it through Congress. You can do it by generating enough really high quality, good quality science so that the attorneys can come in and do it. And it's the market fixing the problem rather than government.
Yeah. The thing that I'm concerned about is if we're trying to get government to fix all of this, then government's just going to get bigger and bigger and have a bigger role in people's lives and more control in people's lives. And it seems to me that's the last thing we want. If you want something fixed, it seems to me if we let enterprising people work on it, enterprising people try to figure things out, they'll do it faster and cheaper than the government.
So, yeah, and you're right. The service on our debt now, that $34 trillion of debt, incidentally, President Biden is adding another $1 trillion every 90 days. That's the burn rate we have. It's insane. Right now, we're paying more to serve that debt, the interest on that debt, than our military budget. Within 5 years, President Trump and President Biden contributed that debt by thinking it was okay to shut down an economy for 500 days and then just print money.
Well, what do you think about this printing money business? I'm looking at this from the standpoint that I've been contributing to my retirement fund since the 80s on. It just keeps getting smaller and smaller. Isn't that just a tax on people?
Yeah, inflation is a tax, and it's a regressive tax. It taxes people on fixed incomes. It taxes working people. It's theft. It is stealing our money. The politicians don't come to us anymore and say, I'm going to spend $200 billion on Ukraine war, and, will you pay for it in advance by diminishing your expectations in life? They just go to the war. They spend $60 or $100 billion, and then they just print it at the other end. And that is a hidden tax on all of us. And it's a theft of the American people. And, that's another reason we got to unwind the war machine, which is what I'm going to do as president.
Well, you said you would end the war and stop Ukraine suffering.
Yeah.
How?
I negotiate an agreement, a deal with Vladimir Putin, which he's tried repeatedly to do. He gave us 2 deals already and signed one in April of 2022. That was a beautiful deal for our country, a beautiful deal for Ukraine. It would have left Donbass and Lugansk as part of Ukraine. It would have ended the war. The only thing he wanted, and this is what he said from the beginning, is an agreement with all of us to keep NATO out of Ukraine. And Zelensky signed it, and then Joe Biden sent Boris Johnson over to Kiev and forced Zelensky to tear up that agreement. And 600,000 Ukrainian kids have died since then, all of them unnecessarily. My son fought over in Ukraine. My son was in a Foreign Legion squadron, and he fought in the Kharkiv offensive. But all these kids are dead. None of them needed to die. We had an agreement that would have been good for everybody.
You say you're going to cut military spending. Do you think Americans will sit still for that?
I think they're going to welcome it. I'm going to bring the military spending home to our country and start rebuilding our industrial base. We've destroyed the middle class in order to pay for the military spending. That does not make us a more powerful nation. I'm going to make our nation return our moral authority, return our influence to the world, and make us a stronger nation. I'm going to do that by cutting the military. We now have 800 bases abroad. The Russians have one. The Chinese have two, one which we built for them in Bagram in Afghanistan. But we have 800. We don't need that. We need to protect our borders. We need to protect the sea lanes and the neutral areas, and we can do that. I'm cutting the budget back to what the Eisenhower minimum, in other words, the height of the budget in real 2024 dollars during the Cold War. So if that budget was enough to protect our interests during the height of the Cold War, it's enough now. We've destroyed the middle class in this country, Phil. There's 61% of the people in this country, including a lot of people who watch your show, cannot put their hands on $500 if they have an emergency in their family. There's 60% are living hand to mouth, and they're desperate. They're facing eviction. They're facing starvation, and it's getting worse.
The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred on JFK's watch, and we had a genuine threat in Cuba at the time. And recently, Russia has reportedly moved warships, nuclear submarines, into Havana Harbor. This could potentially be on your plate in November. I mean, this could be history repeating itself.
I do the same thing my uncle did. My father went over to had Ambassador Dobrynin come over to the Justice Department, and they negotiated a deal. Khrushchev had moved those missiles into Cuba, was because we had just put Jupiter missiles in Turkey, right on his border. And he said, well, if you're going to put them over there, we're going to put them on your border. My father said, my uncle had already ordered them out, and the military had defied him. And my uncle and father made a secret deal with Dobrynin. If you move the missiles out of Cuba, we will move the missiles out of Turkey within 6 months, as long as nobody talks about the deal. And that's what they did. Well, Russia's doing the same thing now. We've just put missiles on their border in Poland, and they're nuclear ready. They're not, as far as we know, they're not armed, but they're armed with something else. Those are 12 minutes from Moscow. So we could decapitate the entire Soviet leadership in 12 minutes. If we get NATO, which is Biden's plan, into Ukraine, they'll be 4 minutes from Moscow. So of course the Russians aren't going to allow that any more than we would allow them to put nukes in Cuba. We're closer today to a nuclear war than we were at any time in history since 1962. And it's all just like it was during World War I. It's people in office who are sleepwalking into a conflict that we should have nothing to do with. Nothing.
I've been studying some things that are going on about China. We talked about health. We're getting 97% of our antibiotics from China. If they decide to turn that spigot off, we could be in a heck of a lot of trouble. We've got Chinese illegal immigrants coming across the border in record numbers, close to 30,000 in 2023. We've got them buying up farmland, coincidentally, around strategic military installations in the United States. I've got a map that is chilling. That's troublesome, is it not?
Very troublesome. And I've been fighting.
Why is this going on? Why is it being allowed?
The easiest explanation is always incompetence. And I think everything that we do on the China side, it's deliberative, it's smart, it's rational, and everything that we do is just, it seems to me to be inept. I was down on the border, and I know you've been there. In Yuma, I watched between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., 300 immigrants come across the border, carried there on big white buses by the Sinaloa drug cartels. It just seems insane to have drug cartels running U.S. immigration policy. Is there some nefarious treachery to our country? You could certainly look at what's happening and say it has to be, or you could say it's just utter incompetence. But with China, we need to take the steps to diminish our vulnerability to China. Do I think that we should be looking for a war with China? No. I think that we need to de-escalate tensions with China and understand that China wants to compete with us. They want to dominate the world, but they don't want a hot war. We spend 3 to 4 times what China does on our military budget. And China relies on, Walmart. They rely on Mideastern oil, which we could cut off. They don't want a war with us. But they do want to compete with us, and I'm not scared of competing with them economically. We need to start projecting economic power abroad rather than military power.
Well, but it's hard for a corporation in America to compete with a government in China because they have forced labor. They don't worry about human rights. They have people working for 47 cents an hour in factories making gloves that we're buying for PPE. How do you compete when you have a free market corporation with minimum wage, human rights considerations, which all should be true, with a government that doesn't have those concerns?
Yeah, I think we need to have fair trade policies rather than free trade policies. Free trade is just a race to the bottom. And that's what, our government officials and trade negotiators have been doing for the past 30 years, is signing agreements that put American labor and American environment at risk and allow those governments to cheat. I don't think that we should do that anymore. When I'm president, we're going to stop doing that.
What are you going to do domestically with these people that are pushing DEI policies and this concept of equal outcome in place of a meritocracy that has made America what it is today?
I believe in equal opportunity, not equal outcome. I'm, against those to the extent that that's what those policies are advocating. I'm dead set against them.
And how do you get that into the mindsets of our university that's preparing the next generation to take over this country? We have universities, particularly our elite universities, that are failing to teach critical thinking and have students that are celebrating Hamas. I've seen and heard things on college campuses I never thought I'd see and hear in my lifetime. The anti-Semitic rhetoric. I've been to Israel. I've seen what took place there, and I see American students celebrating. At first, it was Palestinians, Gazans. That was a thin veil. Then it's just straight up Hamas. And I'm thinking, I can't believe my eyes. I can't believe my ears. And I've said so quite loudly. I'm wondering what they're teaching these kids if they don't have the ability to actually evaluate what's taking place. This was a murderous invasion. What do you do to change the university environment? And what do you do to try and get these universities to have some balance in what they're doing? There's a difference between free speech and actually intimidating Jewish students to the point of fearing for their lives and their safety.
There are so many things that I hear about, Israel being an apartheid state. There's ethnic cleansing taking place all over the Mideast, but people only complain about Israel. Palestinians have all the rights that Jews have. Palestinians can vote. They can serve they can serve in the Knesset. There's a dozen Palestinians in the Knesset. There's nothing like that in any of the other surrounding countries.
That's not apartheid.
This is the only democracy in the Mideast. It's the only place where there's freedom for gays. They hang gays in Gaza. They hang them in Tehran from cherry pickers. It's the only place where women have any rights in the Mideast. And it has freedom of expression. It has freedom of worship. It has freedom of the press.
Would you continue to support Israel?
Yeah, I think America needs to wind down military commitments abroad in terms of regime change wars, et cetera. Israel today is facing an existential crisis. its actual existence is in doubt. And Israel is in a 5-front war. People say you should have a ceasefire with Hamas, and I would love to see that. Every death I see over there is heartbreaking. But how do you have a ceasefire? How do you have a negotiation with somebody who, in their charter, it says any negotiation with Israel is against Islamic law? I don't see how you do that. What we saw on October 7th came from a place of pure hatred and evil, from people, from kids who were raised from when they're in kindergarten to utterly dehumanize Jews and to be sworn to believe that it's glorious to kill them. I understand that Israel doesn't feel that it can, that there's any ending here if Hamas is left in charge of Gaza. I don't see how you do it.
I sat with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I came away from that with a clear understanding. He does not intend to stop until he has eliminated Hamas. He'll do it alone with the support of the world or not.
I'm not a huge fan of Prime Minister Netanyahu or the Likud, but that policy is widely supported.
You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
How would you resolve the division in this country? What's the ticket?
Well, I said a little over a year ago, 13 months ago, when I announced that I was not going to feed into the vitriol and the anger and the hatred and the division. I was not going to focus on the culture war issues that are used to keep us all apart and at each other's throats. I was going to focus on the values that keep us all together, that we all share in common. And what I found is that those values occupy a much greater landscape than the little culture war issues, abortion, guns, trans rights, the ones that we're all fighting about all the time. Everybody wants to fix our schools. Everybody wants teachers to be properly paid. Everybody wants to take care of our vets who are suffering from PTSD. And everybody wants to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power. Nobody wants the border being run by the Sinaloa drug cartels. Everybody wants to figure out a way that we can bring blockchain and AI into our country and make ourselves the hub where we can grow the economy out of this deficit. Nobody wants AI being used as a mechanism for the government to control us and to surveil us. Everybody wants to protect the environment. If you talk about clean air, clean water, wildlife conservation, our Purple Mountains majesty, everybody is going to be behind you. Republicans and Democrats, everybody wants clean food for our children, to get rid of all these chemicals. If you want to start a fist fight, just talk about climate and nothing else. And then you're going to have a war and you're not going to get anything done. But if you talk about, how do we reduce our dependence on foreign oil? How do we take care and mountaintop removal mining in the Appalachians? How do we stop the mercury contamination from coal burning power plants of our fish? Everybody wants that to happen, and they're willing, to fight for it. These issues are framed today in a way that is calculated to keep us at each other's throats. And it's like the jangling keys. It's BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. They're now trying to buy housing, the residential housing, the agricultural lands. They're jangling the keys over here and say, look at the abortion issue, look at the guns, and look at trans rights. And over here, they're strip mining the wealth from the American middle class. Are making it so our kids can't afford houses. We have the first generation of kids that's not going to own their own house. I'm going to change that. I have a whole retinue of policies to make sure every one of these kids who works hard, who plays by the rules, is going to get into a home. And we need to do that. We owe that to our children.
Is government going to do that?
Well, government can't do it.
You talk about millions of jobs for the blacks. Is that government that's going to do that? Is government getting bigger and bigger and create all these jobs?
My job is to shrink government and make it less expensive and more efficient. And we have opportunities to do that today. One, the biggest expense is chronic disease in our military industrial complex. We also can cut waste in government like never before. The Pentagon audit that came out last month showed that they lost $4 trillion They haven't passed an audit in 20 years. They lost this inventory. They don't know where it is.
What do you mean they lost $4 trillion? They don't know where it is?
They don't know where it is. And most of it is inventory, things they bought that they lost track of. A lot of times they'll buy 2 or 3 or 4 times the same item because they can't find it. But you can use AI walkers to go through all the stockpiles and identify every single thing that's in there so you don't lose anything ever. And you can use blockchain to make sure that every American can see every expenditure from the Pentagon, make sure we're not buying, $16,000 toilet seats. And we have an opportunity now to eliminate waste like nothing before in history. And I have a strategy for doing that and how to get it through Congress. Because with that one, we do need to get through Congress.
And when you talk about climate change, how do you keep out of a fist fight about that and just start doing things that make a difference?
I believe climate change is existential. I believe that it's related to human emissions, various kind of emissions, carbon and methane, but I don't insist anybody else does. And I know there's a lot of people who just don't believe that, but I believe it. I also have been working on those issues for many, many years. And I don't believe in top-down solutions. I always talk about market-based solutions, that we need free markets, that if we actually had true free markets in this country, we wouldn't have any pollution. A true free market promotes efficiency, and efficiency means the elimination of waste, and pollution is waste. A true free market would require us to properly value our natural resources. And it's the undervaluation of those resources that cause us to use them wastefully. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. But what polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. So they raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else. And they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a subsidy. I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his production costs. That's what all pollution is. It's always a subsidy involved. And I'm going to eliminate the subsidies.
Do you agree that you don't subsidize things you don't want more of?
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty obvious. I say it because it sounds so obvious. If somebody's going to be president of the United States, we subsidize things we don't want more of, but yet we subsidize them. We paid people more to stay home during COVID than they could make if they went to work, right? And so they did. And then it opens back up and people say, I can't figure out what happened to the supply chain. Well, hell, you paid everybody to stay home. They stayed home instead of working. You say the explanation is incompetence. Can they be that incompetent? Can they be so incompetent that we're going to pay people to sit home in a beanbag and eat Cheetos, and then we're scratching our head why we can't get anybody to work in the hotels, the hospitality industry, unload the ships in the harbor, put the containers up? How do we keep that from happening again when the next pandemic comes down the road?
Well, I mean, if I get to office, we're not going to lock people down during a pandemic.
Okay, I'm underlining that.
It's not the first time I've said.
I'm throwing you a softball here because I want you to have a chance to say it again.
Because I was actually reading the protocols, that were written by WHO and CDC and FDA, and they were all saying you never lock a society down. You take care of the vulnerable, but you let everybody else go to work because you're going to kill more people with the lockdown than not, and particularly with a respiratory virus, because it's going to spread at home. Everything they did was exactly the opposite of what you do. I mean, they were giving tickets to surfers in Malibu, right? They were getting surfers out on the ocean, getting plenty of vitamin D sunlight out there, and they were calling them in. The police were coming to the beach, calling them in and giving them $1,000 tickets and sending them home when this was a virus that only spread in the house. They went to Compton and Harlem, and they put padlocks on the basketball courts, and they locked those kids in with the Cheetos. I got called a conspiracy theorist because back in May of 2020, I said, these vaccines are not going to prevent transmission. There's a tape of me saying exactly what they were going to do back then, that they're going to tell us is 100% effective, and then they're 80%, 70%, et cetera. So the regulators knew that, and yet they were saying something the opposite of that.
If you were going to say what the Biden administration is doing to keep you from running for president, to keep you as out of this race as possible? What are they doing? You're not in the debate.
They're blocking me from participating in the debate. They told CNN they would not show up at the debate if I was on the stage. They're suing me to try to keep me off the ballot. They won't provide me Secret Service protection. I have to spend $1 million a month on my security.
The fifth person in your family to run, 2 have been assassinated.
Yeah.
And you don't get Secret Service.
No, well, my uncle Teddy ran for president too, but they gave him Secret Service 550 days out, even before he was running, and it was a president who hated him.
Yeah, so that's 3.
Jimmy Carter, but Jimmy Carter had class enough to give it to somebody because he knew for the American public and American people, it's important to show that these federal institutions are not being weaponized for political purposes, and they've weaponized the Secret Service. I meet all the metrics for protection. There have been 33 candidates who got it prior to the 120 day. You're entitled to it 120 days from November. There have been 33 candidates who've gotten it before that, most of whom had a fraction of the support that I have. It's a distressing time for American democracy.
If you don't get to a point where you have a clear path to 270 electoral votes, if you don't get into the debates, if it's not clear that you can win the election, what do you do with your substantial and passionate following? Clearly, you have a significant following. You can impact this race significantly if you don't win. What do you do with that? You could be the decider in this race.
Yeah, I've offered President Biden because so many people have said, you're going to be a spoiler and you're going to get Donald Trump elected, and that's going to be the end of the republic. And of course, people who support President Trump say the same thing about President Biden. But what the poll that Zogby did, which is the biggest poll taken, and that poll showed that President Biden cannot win the election. If I'm in, he loses. President Trump wins. If I'm out, he loses 2 more states. He loses Maine and Virginia. And so I said, but I can win. If he withdrew, then I could beat President Trump. And if Trump withdrew, which of course he's not going to, I will, landslide against President Biden. So I said to President Biden, I sent him a proposal. I said, let's do a spoiler agreement where we will co-fund a poll together, the 2 of us. And whoever in October, and whoever is least likely to vote to beat Donald Trump will withdraw. Oh, do I expect that he will take that deal? No. But, I'm not a spoiler. A spoiler is somebody who cannot win.
And stays in.
And they stay in and disrupt the expectations of somebody who can.
So you've made him that offer?
I've made him that offer, yeah.
Has he responded at all?
No.
Will he?
No. But I don't know where he's going to be at that point. I don't know. He seems, when you, every time I watch him, it's kind of heartbreaking. It's like watching your 5-year-old the first time they play on a jungle gym. You're like, is he going to be okay? And I don't know what the people around him are thinking of.
Is there any theory where you would run with him?
With President Biden?
Right.
No.
No way.
No. And
so if the polls are clear, does the Democratic Party make a deal with you? If he steps aside, if he comes up with some theory in the fall, made up or otherwise, and says, I'm going to have to step aside for health reasons or whatever, do they come to you? Do they look at the poll and come to you?
If they did, I would listen to that proposal. But I doubt if they would, because the people who will then make the decision are the superdelegates, and the superdelegates are people who work for or are the possessions of the big corporate lobbyists that fund the Democratic Party. So the lobbyists that fund the party, the big corporations like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, all the military contractors, the pharmaceutical companies, they control the superdelegates. And I think those people, they would rather see President Trump in office than see me in office.
Well, if Trump's side's not going to come to you, then have you built yourself in a box you can't get out of?
Well, I get a lot of Trump voters. So, I get 57% of the people who support me say that they would vote that if I leave the race, they'll vote for President Trump. And then I get a lot of people who were not going to vote at all, no matter what, except if you run. We're not going to choose between the lesser of two evils. But, right now I'm beating President Trump and President Biden in these key demographics. The one group that I don't do well with, which is my Achilles heel, my key group, is baby boomers. If you think about it, the baby boomers should like me because, they were here during the Kennedy era. They remember Camelot with nostalgia. And they loved me when I was only the environmental champion and before I, started working on public health. But what we found is that, I think the reason they don't like me is because they hear all of the sort of the defamations that you outlined at the beginning of this interview. He's anti-vax. He thinks chemicals cause you to be gay. All the ways that those things are treated, the way that they're repeated and they're mischaracterized in the press. So they think I'm genuinely a lunatic, right?
Are you?
Am I a lunatic? Now, I feel like, of course, if you ask a lunatic whether they're a lunatic, they're never going to know. So
are you a lunatic?
No, of course not. I've had a long career with so many milestones that would be pretty unattainable by somebody who is a lunatic. I've won hundreds of cases. I've written dozens of best-selling books on different issues, and I have good relationships. All these, so I feel like I'm defending myself and proving that I'm not a lunatic, which of course is never a good sign.
And I am baby boomers, and that's why I wanted people to hear you talk about the things that you've talked about, because you make a compelling argument for the things that we've talked about, and I've endeavored to give you every opportunity to clear up any misperceptions. And I think you've done an amazing job of doing just that. I don't tell people get out and vote. I'm not the guy that does that. I say, do not get out and vote. Get out and make an informed vote. Don't just get out and vote a ticket. Know who you're voting for. Find out what they stand for, what they really think, feel, believe, and are committed to, and then make your vote. And that's why I love this long-form thing, so people can find out. I didn't just read a headline about Robert Kennedy Jr. I listened to, and they will listen to this top, side, and bottom, and usually more than once. Is there anything we haven't talked about that we should?
Well, I have the highest favorability rating of any of the people that they've polled. So given a choice, people would rather vote for me, and they would rather vote for a candidate that inspires them and that gives them hope for our country and for their future, for rebuilding the middle class, for ending this debt crisis, et cetera, and winding down the wars. But many of them say that they're going to vote for President Biden because otherwise Trump will get elected. So it's out of fear. And the same is true to some extent of President Trump. People say, we got to keep Biden from getting reelected. So they're relying on fear to get the other one elected, and the division, and that amplifies that division because they can't solve that division that is really critical that we need to solve right now because they feed on it and they profit from it and they rely on it. They rely on you hating the other guy. I just say, let's talk about the issues that we all agree on because that's how to make America better. And if I can get people to vote out of hope, then I'll win the election. If they continue to vote out of fear between now and November, then I'm going to lose. One of the big, I think, defamations about me is that I'm anti-vaccine, which is what people have said about me for 20 years. And I've always said I'm not anti-vaccine. I'm fully vaccinated myself, not with COVID. All my childhood vaccines, my kids were all fully vaccinated. And my issue is, like every medicine, vaccines cause injuries. And we know this because the vaccine courts have paid out billions of dollars. The other thing they say is that we shouldn't talk about them because, it will harm public faith in the program. And that is where I differ. I think no matter how rare they are, that we need to take care of people who are injured. And that's the group I, am concerned about. And there are a lot of people who say, when I try to talk about this, I get gaslit, I get marginalized, I get vilified, I get my job taken away. And I think that's wrong. This is a product. It's the only product that you can't sue. So, vaccines, as you know, the Vaccine Act passed in 1986. You can't sue them if you're injured. So there's silence about injuries. What I say is, if they know they can be sued, they behave better. The four companies that make all 72 of the vaccines that are now mandated for our children, those four companies have paid something like $79 billion in criminal penalties over the past 20 years for other products they make for which they can be sued. We should be particularly careful about protecting people who are injured. And that's all I'm saying. I'm never going to take anybody's vaccine. If vaccines are working for you, and God bless you, I believe in choice, in liberty. The government shouldn't be ordering people to take a product, particularly one that is protected from liability.
And they're getting paid for.
Right. But ultimately, my default position is always going to be freedom. And, freedom of choice. And we ought to be able to have the right to make informed choices. The government has shown that it's too corrupt, and its relationship with the pharmaceutical industry is too corrupt to trust them on these issues. We need oversight, and we need, safeguards. And that's my position on vaccines. It's not that we should get rid of them, and it's not that they're bad. It's just that let's take care of the people who get injured.
So you want more transparency.
Yeah.
And if people want to take them, you recognize they do some good.
Yeah.
And people should have a choice.
Yeah.
But an informed choice. And I agree with you. There's not enough transparency about it. That's what you're after.
Exactly.
That's what I mean. There's a perception problem. I think a lot of my audience hasn't heard you talk about that before today. So I think that's been a very revealing interview. I hope you think so.
I really enjoyed it, and thank you for, giving me this platform.
Yeah, I think people are going to learn a lot, and I can tell you, I've been talking to my audience leading up to this, and I said, I want to know what really matters to you, what's important to you, and it comes down to the same two things. Safety. They want to be safe, and they don't feel safe right now. They don't feel mentally and emotionally safe. They don't feel physically safe. And when I drill down on that a little bit, that involves the border, and it involves criminality on the streets, and that involves border. And a lot of them have problems with the fact that we're no longer seem to be a nation of law. People get arrested and turn right back out. So they don't feel safe. And the other is financial security. And if you look at all the way back to the 1940s when Maslow talked about the hierarchy of needs, it goes back to that. First was physiology, people wanting to survive. They want to be safe where they're not threatened and know that they can provide for themselves and their family. And everything after that, watch that third step, it's a doozy. That's what they're telling me. It's security, safety, and they just tell me, these politicians, they just don't read the room. They're asking us to meet them where they are. They don't seem to want to meet us where we are.
No, well, that's my focus. And how do we rebuild the American middle class? More than half the people in this country are making $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs, and they're putting that money on their credit cards. A couple months ago, we hit a milestone at $1 trillion of credit card debt. A guy at the gym yesterday told me that he just got a credit card bill charging 34% interest. If the mafia did that, they would be in jail for loan sharking. All of those companies are owned by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. And, so it's just these mechanisms for shifting wealth upward, and they are strip mining, they are vacuum cleaning the wealth and the equity from the American middle class. They've declared war on the middle class in this country. We cannot support this country with an oligarchy of billionaires President Trump and President Biden, during 500-day lockdown, created 500 new billionaires, and they shifted $4.3 trillion north from the American middle class to this new oligarchy. You can't sustain democracy if you've just got a very, very wealthy above and widespread poverty below, and that's where we are in this country today.
They need to hear you talk about that because I'm telling you, they think he's a Kennedy. Kennedy's a wealthy family. It's American royalty. He doesn't connect with us, doesn't know where we are.
I mean, I've been sitting, at kitchen tables like that for my whole career. Because the career that I chose is representing people, mainly fishermen. My father, many years ago, he would bring us to Southeast Washington, to Appalachia, and he would bring us to the Indian reservations and to the Rust Belt. And he would say to us, and, we would go into people's houses and talk about how they lived. And he would say, these are our people. These are Kennedy people because, the big shots, they don't need the Kennedys. It's the people who, are struggling to make this country a great nation and are struggling with their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And they don't have a voice in Washington. And that's, what you're supposed to do with your life.
Robert, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Phil.
I'm really glad we did this.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.